the infants. That's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult.
Oh, but the infants are the fruit of evil. They are the fruit of evil. The fruit of the loin of evil.
Look,
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today.
And believe it or not, I regret it.
You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed
Okay,
that.
this is a
Oh, what
real.
is this?
This is a real treat. I mean, I've been wanting to start off my my video series, but this is a real treat. So Jordan Peterson faces off against the Jubilee team here, I guess, in Surrounded. So Jordan Peterson, I first started, I don't know what you want to call it, watching or being exposed to Jordan Peterson back like 2017, pretty early on, 2017, 2018, I want to say. It could have been 2017. And I found it kind of interesting back in the day. He would take, some pretty deep subjects such as religion and literature, morality, philosophy, and he would sort of dig in pretty deep, see how it ties to psychological tendencies and whatnot. And it was kind of interesting. The problem with Jordan Peterson is the more you listen to it, the more it never actually, you don't get any satisfaction from listening to Jordan Peterson because there's no end to what he says. It always leads into something else and into something else. There's no finality to say, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I mean when we talk about the archetype of Cain and Abel. But now Jordan has found a niche because he sort of, he scratched the surface of some weird right-wing grift that pretty much everyone else is doing. And he takes a different tact. His tact is, let's be academic about things. Let's go back to first principles and let's talk about psychology. Let me dress, well. Let me not be loud like some of the other right-wing nutheads that are out there. Instead, he took a different tact. But now it's become a grift. It's become a pure grift. And I haven't seen this. I haven't seen this episode of Surrounded. But rest assured, there is a grift here. So it's just a question of where's the grift going to come from and how is he going to use it to grift some more.
Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian.
And Peterson loves the word bucko and bloody. So I'm going to see how many times he uses the two. I mean, just as a joke, we're not going to have an actual counter here or a bingo card, but we're going to see how many times he uses both of them.
Or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right?
Oh,
You're not
damn.
a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Okay. Oh man, this guy.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster,
And a grifter.
public speaker. And today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists.
Oh, he's not going to call him woke? Oh, it's just atheism. Okay.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
We must define God. We must define the word define to define God. We must then understand the letters used in the word God. The 3 letters. It's going to be something dumb like that.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists
Okay.
don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like I was thoroughly...
Oh, he's using the words. He's using the words. Magisterium, hermeneutics. He's using the words. This is gonna... I don't know how this is gonna rub off on Jordan, if he's gonna like that or he's gonna feel a little threatened. Let's see.
in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise.
See, this is a straw man. So what he's saying is, atheists have usually been hurt. Atheists have, you had an overbearing mother, you had a father who used to force you to go to church and force you to do all the stupid things that they do, and now you're fighting back, you're revolting against that. Well, there might be some people who have come to atheism that way, but there's also the people that say, well, I just think the things that you believe are kind of silly. I think the things that you believe don't make sense. There's no evidence. And you're creating a story around an entirely fabricated world. So why should I believe it? That's I think, what is at the heart of atheism, I would say.
Or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a...
Yeah, so this is Peterson's main shtick, is that, well, this is this, and this is that, and this is Dostoevsky, and this is the story of Cain and Abel, and of Abraham, and of Isaac. Like this is what he's going to do. He's going to create this entire confection, and then try to establish his reasoning there.
In a metaphorical substrate, and atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? What is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the
basically the God of the Bible.
Matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
Well, okay, there you go. Now he's going to start nitpicking at every word. I didn't say everybody, because if there's one person that doesn't believe in that, then you can't say everybody. What he's trying to say is that all the gods, we cannot accept all of the gods. All of the gods, there are mutually exclusive principles of the gods. There are contradictory claims for all these gods. So this is what he does. So he can't get you on the substance. So he's going to nitpick at your inability to use the exact words that the way are intended to mean, and then he's going to try to distort the argument that way.
The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical...
So this is Peterson, basically is what he's saying. So don't take things literally. Okay, don't just take things on face value. You got to look at the hidden meanings. You got to look at this with a much more discerning eye. But now, when this guy is calling him out on that same fact, he's going to say, well, why don't we take this literally? Why don't we? Like, it's very clear. If we take this literally, it's very clear. This is the problem of, this is part of the right-wing grift that you're always going to see.
And hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying that we
he's
can't
good.
know, because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
and we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected, and it's complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said
Yeah.
I didn't say the. I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay.
You know what's funny? If you actually read the Bible, so when you hear these guys talking about the Bible, like, and you haven't actually read it, you're absorbing it, and like what these guys like would say, like these theologians or Jordan Peterson type of people, and it's like, wow, there's so much nuance, there's so much hidden meaning, there's so much detail richness in the way these guys interpret it. When you actually go read the Bible, there's very little said about anything. Like all of the big stories of the Bible that you hear, like the flood, the creation myth, Moses, the Ten Commandments, they could all fit on a couple of pages, right? There's so little breadth that most of the Bible is that bullshit that I would say has very little meaning. But all of these stories, they're not well written. And so you have these guys that come up with this flowery language on top of it. It's kind of shocking to me, because when you actually read it, it is disappointing.
Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't,
he's already gone off the deep end.
Defined by atheists who are.
This is why they're lifting up their hands.
I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature, and that you face something that, in the final analysis, is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it, regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And
yeah, exactly.
In the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality?
Wow,
it seems
Kate
like, yes,
knows
if you
stuff.
define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services.
Very simple. Atheism is you do not believe that there is a theos, that there is a God. You do not believe in a God. It's plain and simple. The God of the Bible, I mean, if you ask most people, they would, well, not most people, but most atheists, most people who are well versed in this area, they'll say, well, the God of the Bible is kind of contradictory. The God of the Bible cannot exist. The God of the Bible is full of, I don't know if logical fallacies is the right word, but it's just not something that can actually exist. That's how I would take it. I would just say the God of the Bible is clearly a made-up BS. Simple as that.
services or belong to a denomination. To help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
Not the.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity.
The problem with what Kate's trying to do is, Kate is right. The problem is that you don't have a lot of time. People are trying to vote you off. And if you get into this, this is for a 3-hour discussion that he should have doing this, but not the right place to do this.
To be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with...
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
See what I mean? Oh, isn't that Parker?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono. L-O.
Lono. Now, if he knows something about this, holy cow, that's spectacular.
I know.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity
okay.
Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it. No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do you
rejecting
believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know.
Oh, he
believe in Lono?
didn't say that he's rejected it yet.
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
He walked
My
into
question
that.
is quite simple.
David, you walked
Yeah,
into
but that doesn't
Do you
mean it's
believe-
What you
formulated.
should have said is make a claim about this deity Lono and say Lono is the god of lightning and thunder, and all lightning and thunder come from the god of Lono. Lono is the god that taught people how to farm. That's what he should have said. And then say, you reject it. Ask me if he rejects that claim, but don't just say to reject something outright. Always make a specific claim when you're asking someone to reject something.
Formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described.
You see, that's not the right question, because an atheist is not saying that God does not exist. They're saying, I do not believe in a God. And then you could make that logical leap to does not exist. That's more like the strong atheism. But no one's making the claim that Lono does not exist. We do not know if that's possible.
Right. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lono. I
It's
said I
Lono.
didn't know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion.
Well, atheism, again, is the claim that you do not believe in a God. So what they're saying, what David is saying is he's sort of growing that. He's sort of increasing the lifting that definition of atheism is doing. I wouldn't be doing that because Peterson, he's kind of shrewd. He's going to take that and he's going to twist it back on him.
I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories and
That's
foundational
true.
principles than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay. You can.
They're well
Okay,
concerned
so
with
you go
deep
twisting
matters.
again.
One of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definition.
Right, but they also have to identify
Okay,
with
so is he saying that atheists are people with deep thinking? They're intelligent?
the religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're
Let's
spiritual.
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
He could have done better.
Hi,
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good,
What's
how are
your
you?
name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be...
Not, well, polysemy, yes, but it's not that there could be multiple meanings for a word. I think it's that Jordan just wants to define things in his own way. And, you know, cigar is never a cigar for Jordan.
Emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed
I
to the
get
wall.
what he's doing.
I would say that
I
you're the
wouldn't do
one who
this.
doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor, or a symbol, or the kind of, you know, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but
Okay.
I think that when we use words, we tend
He's
to only
redeeming
imply
himself.
one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa
Can I
is
speed this
moving
up? Else we're
emotionally,
gonna be here all day.
but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, you know, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or
I
that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are
Okay,
multiple
but is the
competing truths.
unification,
I think that
is
I know
the,
that
is
we're-
the unifying principle really the God of the Bible? The God that cares about if you get a tattoo, the guy that cares if you're mixing fabrics, linen and cotton, wool. That's the unifying principle of the universe.
But for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of
And
everything.
why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also
Well,
believe
no, it's very different. It's because they cannot tie gravity to everything else that we know about quantum mechanics. I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but I think that's sort of what it is. Theory of everything.
that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like, you mean like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Throwing spaghetti at the wall. No, I don't throw spaghetti at the wall. I am merely going to come at you from 1,000 different angles in order to see if I could unravel a thread that you can't properly answer, and then I'm just going to call you stupid and then watch you walk away.
Not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific
I
question.
was being sarcastic.
What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
Yeah, so here we get into the solipsistic thing. Well, how do you, if God doesn't exist, how do you even know you exist? How do you even know that you weren't created 5 minutes ago? How do you know what you know? What's your basis for this?
How do you...
This is the solipsistic presuppositional argument that a lot of these types of apologetic people are going to employ.
distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you can imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm
Well,
getting
from
at the fact that your
experience?
conscience guides you. Is
Okay.
that reasonable?
Conscience is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical.
Yes, because the last time you drove and you hit a kitten and you squashed it, you felt bad. Now, the next time that happens, I'm going to try to avoid. So I know. That's why experience matters.
ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how
kind
do
of
you
being constrained by reason.
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives,
Sorry about the noise.
and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? I think we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this is kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm
where-
not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined
it.
it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who define it that way.
Okay, now he's
and
going
it's
to
impressive. You're a very
start
knowledgeable person.
shooting
I'm not
off
trying
all
to be
kinds of
impressive.
stuff.
I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old
Okay,
Testament.
all right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of
Then
opening
how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of
I'm
the Mona Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of
Okay, so God is everything. God is the universe. God is everything around me. God is this cup. God is the mouse. God is my laptop. This doesn't give you anything. It doesn't inform. It doesn't bring you to any. This is what I'm saying. When with Jordan Peterson, you peel back the onion and there's some interesting things, and then it's like, well, I'm just peeling back layers of onion. I'm never getting actually to the central core of this. It's just constant layers and layers of words and word salad.
expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament,
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So
Yeah.
whoever. So
It's
some,
not whoever.
okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay,
major
all right,
Old Testament
all right,
prophets.
all right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand
you-
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being- What
is he
accept
doing, writing it
conscience
down?
as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old
I
Testament.
think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because
I
again,
asked you if you believe that conscience guided
you just
you.
asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
then
in the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheist, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people
Which
tend to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these
Oh my
polysemous
God.
I didn't
ideas
make
of
that point.
painful.
You did.
I
I made a
like,
specific point
characterize
that
it,
God
right.
was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Well, it was very nice to
Yes,
meet you. I
nice to meet
appreciate the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah, it's very brave of you to do this.
Oh, that's the last swipe to him. Oh yeah, very brave for you to come here and sit me in my intellectual mountain here.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Well, morality and purpose cannot be found within science. Is science trying to say that we have to find morality and purpose? I mean, purpose, that's weird. I mean, I would agree with that claim. Does he think he could teach us something with that?
Peterson.
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume.
Yeah, don't
about
let him continue because it just never ends.
science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand.
Oh, why can't he? Is he too afraid to anger the MAGA? Is he too afraid to red pill the red pilled? This is the issue. So he doesn't want to discuss it because as a clinician, he didn't believe in it. He just didn't. Now he can't get himself to explain that because he may have stated it previously. So they don't want to dredge up some old stuff that he said about him being an atheist.
I understand that. And me, myself, I am a
But now he redefines what atheism means.
former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and
No,
tell
it
people?
doesn't say that. It just says that the people of Israel are in bondage and they don't want to be in bondage. And which, by the way, even according to like even Jewish, well, I guess you could say Israeli scholars on the matter, that this hasn't even been proven physically. And even if it does, it's fine. But it's that they didn't want to be enslaved. The people, the slaves, didn't want to be enslaved. That's why they wanted to be let out. It's not that it was wrong to have slaves. It doesn't say that in the Bible.
Exactly how to take care of a slave. Isn't that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on
and
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across Spain.
Well, no. I mean, can't we talk a little bit about the Enlightenment and what the Enlightenment did, about the dignity of man and all of that? It's that people were kind of shitty back then. They weren't good. And slavery was like, why should I work if I can just make you do everything for free? That was seen as a better way to have an economy. I mean, obviously it was bad for the slaves, but the people that were doing the slaving didn't care.
Long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution.
And what do you mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture.
Oh, there we go with the definitions. What do you believe in just? Hey, by the way, he hasn't said bucko or bloody yet. I'm kind of disappointed.
And history, right? We get better.
Well, they did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on
Everyone
the Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery.
Yeah, but
based
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently against slavery, and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race that had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way
morality.
to look at it. Well, it depends.
Well, it wasn't humans. It wasn't humans. It was the Bible. It was the Bible that was rediscovered. No, it's humans that are doing this. So, I forget his name, but he's correct.
Women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there.
No, so humans are capable of doing one thing and they're capable of doing something else. We're capable of righting our wrongs. We're capable of correction. Before we lived like essentially, we lived in a very savage state. And now as we have civilizations, as we have, something called a social contract, we develop other systems. We say, well, you know what, we could live better if we do things a different way.
If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with
I
women's
think that
suffrage
did
as well
happen.
is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal movement which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences as humans, which is what is best
Oh
for
my
all
God.
Is
people.
it driven by conscience?
It could be, which conscience is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage and just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave-owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh, wait, address that first.
What,
all
slavery?
human
So once you lose it...
Slavers, so you can't blame that on the
Once
Bible.
you lose it with Jordan Peterson, you just better give off because he's just going to continue down this
based on their
this
interpretation
vein.
of the Bible,
It was the Protestant Christians...
which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Well, it was great talking with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you, too.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's
Okay.
that's a good way of thinking about it.
Ooh, you got him good there. So now, basically, all it is he's going to reduce Peterson's argument to, well, you know, you just want to do this for yourself. You just don't want to suffer forever, which I guess is good enough, but like, it doesn't do this big call to like some loftier purpose, right?
What is the purpose of heaven? You understand?
Well,
so here's the deal.
At
We
minimum,
can
it's
get
the
into an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can, okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
mean
without
avoiding-
God,
you mean avoiding it.
avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise...
When you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If it,
Everything depends on how you define. How do you define benefit? How do you define how do you define, again...
If you define your benefit...
If it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they were required to... Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into...
Yeah, Book of Job is a weird one. Read it. It's, again, poorly written, but God is like seen as like the sadistic asshole, and like the devil is like the one who seems to be the one that has more, like is more in the right. Very weird.
it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not, well,
yes,
let's
they
define,
did. Yes, they did.
hang on.
If-
Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
So
what do you mean by
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and a justification? I mean, it's ultimately psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can just debate.
Okay, well, so here's my
I
position.
said that God, among other things...
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without
Yeah, so some people who don't like to take this little atheist thing, they talk about this non-theist or lack-theist. They lack a belief in a God. It's not like they're actively disbelief. I think that's all the same thing. It's all word salad. Again, agnosticism, atheism, I think it's all pretty much the same. Do you believe this God exists? Does this God exist? Does that God exist? And if you say no, you're an atheist. Plain and simple.
In the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you come
what
to that
I ought to
conclusion?
do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just
Can we just let the guy talk? Like, instead of like stopping him every 5 seconds to define words?
benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself. And nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
and
hierarchical
that is
structure?
what the quantum...
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things, I think that some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is...
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
So I think Brian was on a good tack. It's just... Oh,
Nice to meet you.
Parker made it. Parker made it. He's usually good. He's usually quick. Usually is able to get them from a good angle. Let's see what he could do here.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect.
You see? So this is the right way to go. Be very specific. Say, I reject the gods that are contradictory, like the omni God, right? Like the could do anything, knows everything, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. So he's taken the right tact so far.
Perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians just like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing
Oh, so there you go. Now he's gonna start twisting it, start moving the goalpost.
a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah. Typically, when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Okay,
Sure.
now we're gonna
so do you
start
believe in all-knowing,
redefining
all-powerful,
God.
all-good notion of God? Do
What do you mean by believe?
you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean?
How's
when
that,
you
sir?
say- What do you mean by social theory? How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God? Do
What do you mean by believe?
you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How's
when you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right, so if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical
Oh, it's
consistency.
the concept of the journey. It's the concept of, I don't know, some other BS that Jordan always puts out.
See, it's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So
How would you define belief? Something you say?
I explain. Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life.
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life.
Don't be so sure, bucko. So another one of Peterson's things is he just doesn't even want to engage with it. Like if he wants to tell it to you, if you engage with what he's saying to you, he doesn't even want to talk about that anymore. Now he wants to talk about something else. This is what Peterson always does. This is why I stopped listening to him.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
So I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I would
they're
have done
asking-
everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to begin
lie?
with.
Oh, bloody, there you go. We got one bloody. So you're lying about Anne Frank. So lying is not good, but you know, do you lie to the Gestapo about Anne Frank in your attic?
It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
Why?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far. Look,
Did you
don't
eat
play
today?
games.
Oh, now he's anti-Semitic. Yeah, I just give away. Maybe Jordan Peterson would just give away the fact that he has some people hiding out.
I'm not playing games.
Yes, you are. If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you
clarify
like
it.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic
Yeah, yeah,
hypothetical
like,
where
like
you
if you-
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question
What's
for
odd?
some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking.
Oh man, this is interesting. I think he's got Jordan a little. His anus is puckered. That's for sure.
Just clarifying. But like again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's
answering
life.
it in a
Obviously,
manner
that's not
you
what
don't
truth is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity.
imagine that I was.
He got it. He's got it. He found out. He's basically explained the crux of Jordan's existence. Exactly. You got it.
situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance.
Okay, so if you lie about saving someone's life, make a stupid little lie, that you've made a bunch of catastrophic errors leading up to that. What a stupid way to reason through this.
Even though you lied in that scenario. So
not without the context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a corner.
How's it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Oh, Parker's
My next
got
claim
him.
is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Oh, you worship at the altar of the woke God. You worship at the altar of Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, who else? Elizabeth Warren, I don't know. This is what he's going to say. Or he's going to say you worship money, you worship status, you worship following.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right.
That's a stupid definition. Whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping. So if I got to cut the grass, I'm worshiping the grass. If I need to work to make a living, I'm worshiping work. If I need to have supper, I don't understand that. How is that worship? I think the word worship there is doing a lot of heavy lifting that has no business doing.
So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I suppose.
Right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. Like it's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay,
Yeah?
so you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational, right?
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal and output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony.
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend.
she's taking.
Well, yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking, because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right. So we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stands independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exist as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
I think what she's trying to do here is interesting. It's just, I don't think it's the right venue for that. And you got to be more belligerent to like his idea of morality, and that how atheists have no basis for morality. You have to be more belligerent, saying, well, yes, atheists can be moral because, first of all, God is not a good indication of morality. I mean, look at the God of the Bible, the stuff that he does. pretty bad. Not exactly the epitome of morality. I would say that, what will allow humanity to flourish, less suffering is usually good. So if you use these things to instill morality, I think it's much better than using the Bible. But I don't know. I think it's fine what she's doing. It's just not the right place to do it.
That's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. So Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So, in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence...
Okay.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes... that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes.
Okay, someone could believe in God and not be a Christian, that's true. But what he's going to say is that, yes, but Christ is the best example of what this kingdom of heaven on earth, whatever BS he's trying to get at.
Makes in the Gospels, he says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they
just... I know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary.
Wait, voluntary self-sacrifice? The principle of the cosmos is based on the voluntary self-sacrifice?
Example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society.
So did Jesus sacrifice himself knowing that he was going to be with God? So he basically died. He was tortured. Let's say he was tortured for sure. That must have been really painful. And then he died, and then his torture ends. But now he's God. Now he's 2 days later, 3 days later, he's seated at the right hand of the Father. So, I don't know. Was that a big sacrifice?
Society, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right now, the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
To some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right? So imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity say...
Okay, but the pattern, right? What is the pattern? The pattern is to have some sort of semblance to all the good stuff that you want to learn about from the stories of the Bible, the stories of Jesus, I want to say. But it doesn't mean that everything has to be that, right? So is Aristotle in heaven, according to the Christian? I don't know. Is Socrates in heaven? Are Are all of these, is Moses in heaven? Kind of weird. Job didn't believe in Christ.
Say acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something
8/12
like that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
well, I hesitate to do that personally because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12.
Wow, she's lasting long.
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see...
Why in boxes?
When I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less
Do the
Christian.
people who are
Things
voting,
like that, right? So
trying
we
to
can
get her
categorize people.
voted
Well,
off,
I would say more or less
do
voluntary.
they ever downvote? Like, I mean,
But that's also what
like
we came
lower
to,
their
is that
flags,
someone can
let
be
the,
like 60% or 70% Christian
the
based
meter
on simply
goes
acting
down.
in
I
that
don't know,
way.
I've never seen that.
I watched that debate.
Pause there. He's been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
Very thoughtful. Man, only one bloody.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Yeah, I don't
that's it.
agree with that. That's a stupid definition of the word worship.
That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I can flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay.
That'll
do
do.
Catholics attend to Mary?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but
Oh,
not at the top.
Mary.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Oh, he's getting a little belligerent.
Tend to.
prioritize,
Do Catholics
and sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to
you
my
under- you
definition.
understand-
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can
Catholic-
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay. You're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
Oh, okay, so no, he doesn't want to answer. So you go to Catholic church, he doesn't want to answer. Is he a Christian? Why do you go there? He doesn't want to answer. He wants to nitpick at other people, but he doesn't want to answer any questions himself.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheist?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean,
either you're a
'cause
Christian
I won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
Don't be a smartass, bucko. You're being bloody belligerent.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're
To talk to what? A non-theist?
probably in the wrong YouTube video.
Sorry, a non-atheist?
You're really quite something. You are.
Aren't I? But you're really like nothing, right? You're not a
Okay,
Christian.
I'm done with him.
Wait.
No, you're probably in the wrong YouTube Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
Wait. Let's listen to this in all of its glory. I like this. Good for you, bucko.
Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something. You are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Why does he do that? Oh, he's all riled up.
Hi there.
Hi, nice to
What's
meet
your
you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So
There's
I
a hierarchy.
prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage.
but
Are you
don't, Just let the guy talk.
saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
The
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing.
Okay, so now he's already starting to back off of his definition. So now he's saying that it's akin. Whatever is prioritized is akin. But you prioritize different things in your life. So I prioritize my health. I prioritize my children's health. I prioritize my financial well-being for my family. Does that mean I'm worshiping all those things? Your definition is stupid, Jordan. And now the chickens have come home to roost.
prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
and it's partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your wife.
I love her, so I prioritize and I sacrifice for her.
Right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage?
I mean, I'm married to my wife because I love her. That's also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. Right. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right. Okay. So even the small things. I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying worship is almost a spectrum, right? It's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like that's a good question.
When is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
The closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
how
worship.
Close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I worship love?
Do you attend?
Okay, so Jordan, you've dug your grave with this stupid ass definition of the word worship, and now there's nothing you could say to get out of it by saying, you know what, let me redefine it because my definition just sucks. This is, wow. I'd like to see Jordan carry on this worship definition. You know, he probably uses it because, oh, well, you are prioritizing DEI, you are prioritizing wokeness, so then you worship at the altar of wokeness. This is I think, his shtick. But in this case, it doesn't seem to be working on the people that have presented here, so his definition of worship is kind of backfiring on him.
Consequence of love? I'm trying to define something. What do you mean worship? Well, I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you presumably worship.
Yeah, that's a better definition, I would say.
Towards your wife?
I have that.
Do you privilege her compared to other women?
Of course I privilege her compared to other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
No, worship is almost like an irrational reverence towards something. That you love, you worship, I don't know, Michael Jackson because of you think he's the greatest superstar or whatever. But the way he's defining it is, the way common people would use the word worship is one thing, and the way he's using it, completely wrong.
An elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over other human beings, but I don't think that she is
You're making the assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. No. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're either going in many directions, or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship? Right?
So if you have no hierarchy, you worship everything.
Prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said, the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the closer
you get... Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is it? So it's just an opinion that Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay, so now he's again. Well, okay. At least if I had a bingo card, I could check off Dostoevsky a few times. But this is the problem, right? This is the problem with Jordan Peterson.
Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on opinion.
Just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true.
Let me ask you.
I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine does.
Good. Well,
so it's about purpose.
So let me. Yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then. Okay. The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice. So and maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
depends on what you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You claimed I worship something.
And if you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life.
There's no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay, so if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you...
Okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh, there are.
How do you explain
Man,
that?
Gerard is really keeping him on his toes. He's going to congratulate Gerard.
Nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness, and what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them to, for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened. Because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Okay, but it still is a god, right?
Or
Of course
devoted believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen. But it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
Thank you.
That's what he does toward the end.
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy.
Yeah, you could beat them with a rod as long as they don't die before a day or two.
In Numbers and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics?
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text.
65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text? What does that mean?
You take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake. I think it's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So,
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the
Okay, but no. So why don't you answer Ian's question? Okay. If this is the basis of the Christian ethics and there's some pretty bad stuff in there, what do we do with that stuff? He doesn't want to deal with it. He just wants to say, well, it's time of war. It's time of war. We got to do this. So you got to barbecue chickens. You got to, who's the name of the guy that one of the prophets, kids were calling him Baldy, and then he basically used God to control a bear, like to maul these kids. Like, this is part of it, right? This is part of the stories. Or the woman that was enthralled by the size of the horse's penis.
morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics, that's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't.
Look. He's searing now. He's using his I don't know, those orange eyebrows. I don't know what's going on. Is he taking some powder from Donald Trump? Now he's going to sear into this guy. He's going to say, well, don't take it out of context, bucko.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants.
What about the donkeys and the asses and the oxen?
What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows.
See, so now he's already diverting. He's moving the goalposts. So he's saying, oh, that's not the Bible. That's just, it's part of the human past. It's not just about the Bible anymore. Now it's about humans.
I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one is God
Right.
saying, go and do this
such a thing?
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God
Yeah,
says, that's it, and go.
exactly. Sins of the father. So here you go. They lost one day 400 years ago, and now God is telling him to go do this, and he's saying, oh, it's okay.
Wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Ian, you are rocking.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult.
Oh, but the infants are the fruit of evil. They are the fruit of evil. The fruit of the loin of evil.
Look at blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a
Oh, read it at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. Wow, interesting.
directional morality that emerges across time, that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress
So
what I just said.
so I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great.
Is God perfect? No, you're gonna have to provide more context to the word perfect. Like God is supposed to be perfect. God is all-knowing.
No, like
I think
the
it's a
great making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So,
Okay,
so,
so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless
Yeah,
thing
exactly.
say, here's
Why?
what's good, here's the absolute good
God
thing to do
2.0.
at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the
does,
truth. That's one.
that's totally fine, but
No,
presumably,
no. You don't get to
that's
skate over
because
that,
it's a
which
straw
that's
man.
totally
It's
fine.
a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait
that
a
God,
second.
Man, Ian, you are rocking. Ian, wow. Get this guy on. Jordan, invite him on, man. You got to talk to this guy for at least 2 hours. Get him on Rogan. Go for a 4-hour marathon.
You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a
find
second.
one maxim that's transcendent across
I
situations.
didn't
and
say any
just
of those
did.
words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation you're a
rephrase.
part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
What?
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation.
Oh my God, what a dumb thing. Wait. Let me just rewind here. Like, that is uncharitable, I gotta say.
Find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I'm out of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a
find
sec.
one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say
I
any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
What did he
I
say?
didn't
And
say
I
any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
What conversation you're a part of?
Seriously,
He's gonna point at him. Look at that scowl.
I mean it. If we're going to have a
means it.
serious
Sure.
conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Conduct yourself properly like the lobsters do. Stand up straight, bucko, and clean up your room.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect
distinguish?
being
How do we
is
distinguish?
revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do
So,
we distinguish between whether
between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only,
underst-
No,
yeah,
I
well, we
think
can
you
only
did
see
a
it
good
through our
job.
own
being,
lenses.
presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of
How-
time
how does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect
Sure.
and complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure,
Okay,
but
now,
like-
wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At
But
the
then
point in
how
time,
can
God
we
is literally
know?
the one who created us. He could have
If there's a perfect God out there trying to relay something to imperfect beings, limited beings with limited knowledge, limited understanding, then why be so obtuse about it? Why not say things more plainly? This is the dumb part. This is the dumb part of religion that I can't understand why people believe in such dumb things.
have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand like thousands of years in the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible.
Exactly.
Because
Wait
if
a sec. Let's
well,
not go to
because
that
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God...
incoherent.
Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you. But
Yeah, and 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then free will Theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
you tried to
understand
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks the power, or he could have done it, in which case he would have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Which just means that the free will defense fails, like all this, like
Like I said, if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more clearly so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't
Causally,
make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Okay, so now Peterson's going to choose someone to debate. Parker's good. And Ian is good. Gerard was good. But why would he choose this guy if he didn't even take part?
I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Okay, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time culturally. And when you define meta-truth, I don't see the distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also said you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits, you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the case.
But
And
I
I've
think
also
that's true because they don't even know how else to think about it. Like, wow, it's deepening my faith because my faith is in something that I cannot explain. My faith is in something that is so mysterious to me. So whatever could create more mystery, whatever could create more profundity of thought without it ever saying anything is going to deepen your faith, but it doesn't lead you to anything. This is the problem of Jordan Peterson. It leads you to just more speculation. This guy could keep writing books for the next millennium.
I've talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence that all converge on something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There's a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right? Be the most plausible. Because in regards
it's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote-unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of the classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that.
Protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about how these interpretations of the Bible, if they kind of resonate with us. And I think that can in some case be some kind of evidence. Oh, this might be true, but I think we need to ask: is evidence damning? Right? Is this evidence certain?
The problem with her
So,
claim that Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended is that I don't even think Jordan Peterson understands his framework for understanding Christianity. And the one that's in the Bible is, it's always been redefined, and that's why you have so many different sects of Christianity. There's thousands, right?
But I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all Trinitarian. I'm sure that there is in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right, to tell us about, fights between brothers. Mm-hmm. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact. Were there two people that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why it matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says. And
many ways.
Right, but if we interpret...
Sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes facts,
but for
sometimes
example,
metaphor.
The reason why it's
how do you
important,
know?
right, very important is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 15, 17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins.
True.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, even as just events, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happen, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to our faith. Do you see what I'm saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that? You pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well, there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture. Mm-hmm. I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. It's the case
then
that forever
why
when
do
people have been
you
interpreting religious
purport
stories,
to
they
say
wrestle
that
with
it's
exactly
true?
the question that you just described. When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be deciding factor in if someone is damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why I
don't concern myself so much with that particular question. That would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint, and I'm not putting that down, by the way. Mm-hmm. You're asking me a question I really can't answer. Okay. I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right, so I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed
I'm a little
to
disappointed
its
by
end,
this
at least
segment.
in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. Well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that...
Why is the burden on Christianity?
Because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can,
what evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you so much.
Very good.
Very good.
I don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the content.
you.
That was very good.
Thank you so much.
Very good. I don't like talking to win, but...
Oh, I don't like talking to win. If I said I don't like talking to women. But you don't like talking to win, but it seems like that's all you accept, that if the person is testing you, you just push them away.
There were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people to see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration and establishment of a harmonious understanding and peace.
Jordan Peterson, out of all of the kind of theists that are on the internet, he's one of the better ones in regards to just being genuine as a person. But I do feel like he has a lot of, I guess, wordplay that can make it a little bit difficult and kind of just muddies the waters in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking into that.
Yes. Well said. Let me hear that again.
in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today. I think if the average person followed what Jordan Peterson said, they'd realize that fundamentally Jordan Peterson is not a Christian, in fact, uses many atheistic principles, and operated under bad faith by seeming to forget what basic words meant when he didn't want to answer a question.
His definitions can kind of shift a little bit depending on the moment, and I think that he wasn't afraid to flex that definitional muscle.
I felt really good about our conversation. I thought that it highlighted some key issues in Jordan Peterson's theology. I hope he reflects on these issues and maybe deepens his perspective on them in the future.
With Zena, she was able to build up such a rapport that he chose her in the end, and they were able to have an extended dialogue, which is something I had hoped for. So maybe I learned a little something from Zena about being...
Okay, interesting. So there you have it. Yeah, kind of an okay discourse. I mean, look, this is Jordan Peterson. So if you're falling into this red-pilled notion that Jordan Peterson is showing you how things really are, just pick up a book and read. Don't fall into this claptrap of word salad because when someone seems to be very intelligent, they bring in all this different metaphor and they bring in different stories and they try to tie things together. It doesn't, and you have a hard time understanding it. It's not because you're dumb. It's because they are striving, they are grasping at straws. And that's what basically drove me away from him that's like 7 years ago, I guess. But it's just terrible. There's just nothing there, really. And you'll regret it. Thanks. Bye.